Hello everyone, I am Frans, and in this tutorial I'll be showing you how to set up your programming environment to program games in Slick2D. Before we start this tutorial, uh, I'm going to assume a few things here. First of all, I'm going to assume you have some programming experience, um, specifically in Java. It doesn't have to be extensive, but having some knowledge is going to help you a lot here. Um, Second of all, um, I'm going to assume that you have worked with some kind of IDE before. Um, I'm going to use Eclipse for this tutorial series, and in the tutorials upcoming, I'll be showing the different features that Slick2D has to offer, and I'll be showing these all individually. And um, let's start out here. So the first thing we're going to need is a IDE. So we can grab Eclipse here. Make sure you get the right version, otherwise it might not work on your PC or something like that. This will be our programming environment. Um, we're going to set up our Slick2D project over here. Second of all, we're going to need Slick2D, obviously, and you can simply download that here. Just grab the library. We don't actually need the source code, but it could be quite interesting to take a look if you want to. And because Slick2D makes use of the lightweight Java game library, we're gonna need that one as well. So you go to download and just grab the newest version. It should work, and that's all we need for this. So because I don't want you guys to wait and see me download those things, I've already downloaded them for you. Here we go. 2 zip files and a jar file. Jar file is a library file, and you can just simply extract these two, and you can start up Eclipse by simply clicking the .exe file on Windows, of course. Once you started up Eclipse, you'll be seeing a screen like this. We will just go to the Workbench. Once we're here, you can see a few things over here. First, you can see we're currently in the Java mode. There's different modes for different programming, but we will need Java for our Slick2D. Then there's a few windows here. The main thing we're going to use is the console window. This is basically the output that we use for system outs and any logging and all that jazz. So let's just start up here by creating a new Java project, and we're going to call this project setting up. We can change the Java version here, but it's not really necessary, so let's just keep it at the latest version. There we go. So now we have this project, we can create Java programs in it, but remember we wanted to use the Slick2D library. So what we want to do is tell Eclipse that we're going to use this library. So we can do that by simply creating a folder here, and in this folder we're going to put every library that we're going to use. So first, that is the Slick2D library. There we go. And then the lightweight Java game library. And we don't actually need everything from this. We don't really need the resources, and we don't need the documentary. So all we need is the jars and the natives, and I'll explain what these two are later. So we paste them here, and what we have now is we have our resources here, and we still have to tell Eclipse or Java that we're actually going to use these libraries. As you can see, there's quite a few libraries here. We don't need all of these as well, but we could use those, and let's just tell Eclipse how to use these libraries. So you do that by right-clicking on your project, then click on Properties, then you go to the Java build path, and in here you see a few tabs. You want to go to the Libraries tab, and you want to add a jar. So what we're going to do is we go to Libraries and select Slick.jar. As you can see, we can now use the Slick.jar as a library. If you press OK now, you can see that there's a little icon here, and you can also see at the reference libraries that Slick is included in our libraries. And you can also see all the different classes and everything that Slick has to offer. You can view it over here. You can't view the source code. We didn't download the source code. We just downloaded the pre-compiled library. But we can actually see, like, if you go to let's say particles, for example, we can see that there's different classes here, and for a class we can see the different variables and methods that it has. But I'll explain these methods and different classes and utilities that the Slick has to offer. But we still have to tell Java here that we're also using the other library, the Java lightweight Java game library. So we're going to add that jar as well. Go to libraries again. You can see no more Slick here because we already referenced that. And then we go to jar, and we're just going to get the normal one. There's a debug version. There's also a library for multiple input kind of things, like Xbox controllers and all that stuff, but we'll get to that in a later tutorial. So let's just include this one as first. So because the lightweight Java game library uses OpenGL for rendering, we actually have to tell it what kind of operating system we're using, or rather which files it's going to need for it to access OpenGL on your system. So we go to Edit, then we go to Workspace, and we go again to Libraries, and this time we go to the natives. So because OpenGL is available on these platforms, there's different files that describe how to access OpenGL on those systems. And because I'm on Windows, I'm just going to select the Windows folder here and click OK. If you're on a different system, then you can obviously choose your own system. And this is not going to affect the system that we can get our ultimate final product on. This is just for our testing purposes. So we set that up, and then we press OK. So now that we get those two libraries referenced, it's time for us to test stuff out. So we're just going to create a package here, and let's just call it test. So we got a package here, then we go new class, and let's just call it setup class. And we also want a main function because we want to run this. You can also add it yourself, but there's a convenience here to just click it, and there we go. You can see auto-generated method. We're just going to remove this as well. So we can save this file and we can run it now. Well, you can see nothing happened. It's terminated. Well, we don't actually do something yet, so let's open a window in Slick2D. The way we're going to do this is we'll be using a basic game for now. In the later tutorial I'll be showing you a better way of doing this using state-based game. But for now, basic game is going to do, and we're going to use that by extending it. So we're just going to save, and you can see, okay, basic game cannot be resolved to a type. So we have to say, okay, this basic game comes from Slick2D. So automatically finds the file, but there's more. As you can see, it has to have a constructor. So I'm gonna add the constructor, and you can see it has to have a title. So let's remove this, and we can just leave this here. And there's even more. BasicGame has a few extra methods that we have to implement, and you'll be seeing that it has added 3 methods. And what these methods do is, once we create a basic game, it's gonna call the init method. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna move the init method over here, because this is the first method that's gonna be called. Next up is the update method, and we're gonna move that below that, and then the render method. So let me just explain what these methods actually do. The init method is only called once, and it's called on the creation of your basic game here. And what you want to do in the init method is load your resources for your game, create all kind of stuff that you're gonna need to run your game, and you want to do it over here in an init method. In a later tutorial, I'll be showing you how to set up a loading screen, and the loading screen is actually going to use the loading of resources from the init to load the different resources. So you want to do that over here and not in the update or the render method. The update method is your method that is going to get called every cycle of your game. So let's say a common amount of frames per second for a game is 60 frames per second. So what you typically want to do is have your update have to be at least the same as the render method, because if you update, let's say, half the speed, then you're going to render a lot of frames that don't actually show something new, so they're obsolete. So what you want to do in update method is you want to update your game logic here. So if you have a character and your character is moving across the screen, you want to update it here and not in the render method. You only want to render your character at the right position at that time. And this also allows for the update to run even more times than the render method. So if you have a computer with a slow graphics card, you can have slower frame rates, but because the CPU can handle it, the update method will be called multiple times before the render, which makes your game still go fluently, at least the game logic, but the frames will be a bit laggy, but at least your game won't slow down. This is something that doesn't happen in some older games, because they just run at a certain speed, and once they get a higher frame rate, the update is going to be more and more called, and you will get a faster game. And this is why a lot of old games don't directly work on your computer. Before we go to the render method, let's take a look at the arguments. At first you can see the game container. The game container is your viewing window. So basically what you see here is the eclipse window. And basically the eclipse window, the outside of it, is your game container. It contains the resolution, the position of your mouse, and things like that. So we're gonna move the arg0 and call it container. So let's do that with all 3 methods. And then we're going to look at this one. This integer is actually the delta. And what the delta means is every time an update is called, the delta is given to the update. And the delta is the amount of time in milliseconds that has passed since the last update. So if you run the update 10 times per second, you will get a delta of 100, as in 1 second there's 1000 milliseconds, and 1000 divided by 10 is 100. So if you have lower frames or lower update calls, you will have a higher delta. And you can actually use the delta here to make sure that your game keeps running smoothly, even though you don't actually get a lot of update cycles. So this is for CPU slowdown. The next method, and an also important method, is the random method. The random method doesn't have the delta, but it has the graphics, as the random method is for rendering your graphics to the screen, and the update method is for updating your game logic. The way that the methods are called is the update first and then the render. So let's just clean this code up. Let's get rid of that, get rid of that, that. Then we're going to save it, but we still got to start up our program. And we can actually do that by creating an AppGame Container. Well, it's going to give an error because it can't find the AppGame Container. So what we want to do is, let's just call it app, and let's say a new AppGame Container. And now it's going to say, okay, I know that it's in the Slick library, so let's import it. So what you're going to see now is that there's two ways of creating an AppGame Container. We can pass it on a game, which a basic game is, or we can patch it a game, an integer, and a boolean. We're just going to use this one because the integer and the boolean are the resolution and if it's full screen or not. But we can also do that separately. So we don't want to get pass on null. We want to create a new setup class. So let's name this setup test. And what we also want to do is, because when we create this basic game, every method has throw slick exception. So what slick exception is whenever an error occurs that's triggered in one of the Slick utility classes, it's going to throw a slick exception. So when the image fails to load, it's going to throw a slick exception. So you can actually try and catch these if you want, but we're just going to throw the slick exception over here, and we're just going to deal with the error if we get one. So we save now, and you can see here the value local variable app is not used, and it's actually correct about that. The first thing we want to do is set display mode. So here are resolution again, so let's say 800 by 600 pixels, and we don't want it to have full screen. So we save that, and the last thing we have to do is actually start the window. So we save that, and if we test this now, we click on the run button, and you can see a bit of output over here in the console. You can see the Slick build, the lightweight Java game library version, the original display mode, and the target display mode. So what you can see here is our game has started up. We can see the FPS showing here, but we don't actually have something on the screen yet. So let's add something on the screen. You can use the stop symbol over here, but we can just also close the application. So let's just say hello world on the screen. So we're going to do that using the random method. I'm actually going to rename the graphics over here, and we're going to use the graphics to draw a string. So you can see there's a lot of functionality to the graphics object, but we're just going to use the draw string here, and it's going to have a string, so hello world, and an x and a y value. Now these x and y values are calculated from the top left of your screen. So if you see this window over here, say this point over here is the 0, 0 value. And once you go lower, you will have an increasing y value, and once you go to the right, you have an increased x value. So let's just put this somewhere on the screen. There we go. Start up once again, and there we go. Hello world. So now that we have our hello world on the screen, we also come to the end of this tutorial. In this tutorial we learned how to set up our project in Eclipse, how to set up a basic game, what the init method, update and render method do, how to set up a display mode. I recommend you just look around in the different methods of the app container, because you can do a lot of things with this as well. You can disable the FPS if you want, using the set show FPS method. You can change the resolution. You can also look around in the graphics object. It's quite simple to draw simple shapes, like a line, of course, a rectangle, an oval, things like that. So next time we will be looking at images, how to load images, rotate images, draw images to the screen, and what kind of things we can actually do with images. So I hope you learned something from this tutorial, and I'll hope to see you next time.